How's it going, everyone? My name is Shizukira, and today we are going to be taking a look at some more crazy math stuff, taking a look at what the best memory fragments are going to be for CHIZURU. Now, for those who don't want to go through all these numbers, we will of course start with the TLDR as always. We will then move on to talking about Executioners versus Scarab versus Cursed Corpse when it comes to a basic attack build. We'll then take a look at some different crit rates, as well as looking at non-basic attack builds. And finally, we'll wrap it up by taking a look at Orb of Inhibition, as well as Blackwing, and talking a little bit about Emblem and Eye of the Eyeless. So before we get into all of that, let's start with the TLDR. The best all-round set for CHIZURU is going to be Executioners, Blackwing, and Cursed Corpse. However, if you are running a basic attack build, it will be more beneficial to swap out Cursed Corpse for Seth Scarab. But if you don't want to bother with that, the damage loss isn't super significant, at least with 6 basic attacks. Again, we'll get to that later, but that's up to you to decide. If you know you're going for basic attacks, Seth Scarab. If you want to have more variety, Cursed Corpse. And that is going to be your best memory fragments for CHIZURU. Now, for those who want to see why that's the case and all the different numbers that go into it, let's start talking about it. So, starting off with 2-piece sets for basic attack builds. One thing you'll notice is that Blackwing is not here. Don't worry, it is factored in later on, but there really wasn't a need to include it here, and you'll see later on it's not going to matter anyway. But let's start by talking about what we're even looking at. So, the top 3 lines here are using Executioners, the middle 3 are for Scarab, and the bottom 3 are for Cursed. At the top, we have 100% crit rate and 1 hit for Shadow of the Moon. And then down the left side, we can see how many Moonslash cards are being played. Bear in mind, each card hits twice, so the first one saying Moonslash times 4 is actually 8 hits of Moonslash. And don't worry, I know that Bind 3 and Bind 5 have an extra hit compared to Bind 1, those are factored in as well. So if we didn't factor it in at the very top, you would be seeing around 550 damage and 650 damage, but we have factored in the extra hit in the calculation, so that's why they are 11 and 1300 respectively. And then there are 3 total columns. Those are just adding the Moonslash to whatever bind is next to it. So the first one is Bind 1, Bind 3, Bind 5, you get the point. So taking a look at all of this, one of the first things you'll notice is that Executioners is just far and away better than everything else in almost every single situation. Again, we are looking at 100% crit rate, but we will look at some other crit rates in just a moment. And you can even see that when we are looking at these high crit rates, Executioners can even outdamage Scarab if you are critting enough. Now, if you're wondering how much crit damage we actually ran these with, Cursed and Scarab are using 150% crit damage, and Executioners, because of the set effect, is running 175% crit damage, and then of course, as we mentioned before, 100% crit rate in this example. Now, when we take a look at the difference between Scarab and Cursed Corpse, you can see that to no one's surprise, the Moonslash is going to be hitting significantly harder, but it is going to lose damage on Shadow of the Moon, not surprising. The reason we haven't included Oni and Karmic into these calculations, firstly, is because Oni, you want the Epiphany that gives you more basic attacks, otherwise we wouldn't even be doing this first calculation. So because of that, we won't be seeing any damage come out of Oni. And even though Karmic isn't here, we will talk about Karmic in just a moment. But you can see that Scarab is going to be out-damaging Cursed no matter what Shadow of the Moon we are using, whether it's Bind 1, 3, or 5, we are still going to be hitting harder with Scarab. Now, if you are able to get your Shadow of the Moon to 10 hits, keep in mind we have the extra hit, so it's actually 11 hits at Binds 3 and 5, you will start to out-damage Scarab, even if you are using 6 Moonslashes. But with the basic attack build, you're often not getting a high amount of hits on your Shadow of the Moon, and on top of that, especially because we're duplicating Oni Hunt, it is going to be very difficult to get an 11-hit Shadow of the Moon having only played 6 Moonslashes, because as soon as you play a 7th or an 8th, you immediately fall behind again. So for basic attack builds, you are always going to take Scarab over Cursed no matter what. Now over here, we are looking at effectively the same graph, but now we are taking crit rate into account so we can see your average damage over the course of a fight. And you can see that 22 crit rate is about the lowest you can go for Executioners to be stronger than Cursed. If you are somehow, by whatever miracle, below 22% crit rate, then Cursed would be better than Executioners on average, though you would still be behind Scarab, again, for basic attack builds. That being said, once we get to 40% crit rate, we will then be out-damaging Scarab even when we are playing 6 Moonslashes. Of course, if you are playing more, then you will need even more crit rate, but playing more than 6 for each one Shadow of the Moon you play is going to be kind of difficult, especially because you actually want to be playing Shadow of the Moon pretty often in a basic attack build, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But the point here is that ideally you want to aim for a bare minimum of 40% crit rate, though a lot of people are going to be shooting for higher than that, at least talking 65-70%, depending on what you have available. Now, when it comes to talking about Shadow of the Moon in this context of basic attack builds, how often should you be using your Shadow of the Moon? Well, there's a really easy way to answer that. Which one of these is going to give you more damage based on how quickly you can play them? In the time that you could play Shadow of the Moon Bind 5, you can play nearly 2 Bind 3s and of course 5 Bind 1s. So which one of these is actually giving you more damage? Well, when it comes to Bind 1 versus Bind 3, you ideally want to be playing Bind 3s. That extra hit is going to be really, really valuable, and it is going to just slightly outscale what 3 Bind 1s could do. So if we take a look at the damage of what 3 Bind 1s can do, you see that's going to come out to 1083. But when comparing that to a single use of Bind 3, it's going to be 1107, which is just a little bit stronger. Now, the interesting part is when we talk about Bind 5. So we can see here that for a single hit, Bind 5 is going to be hitting for 1203. Again, I say single hit, it's actually 2 hits, but 1 use. And we can see here that playing Bind 1 5 times is going to result in 1805 damage, which is actually more than what the Bind 5 was doing by quite a significant margin. Now, there's of course the elephant in the room. Playing Bind 1 5 times is 5 AP. Playing a Bind 5 once is only 1 AP, and that's true. So spamming Bind 1s for the most part isn't going to be super realistic, and ideally you want to be at least hitting Bind 3, because that's going to give you the most damage. So depending on your build and depending on the content you're doing, it might vary slightly for what bind you want to be using your Shadow of the Moon. But if you want to be getting out the most damage possible, you want to be using it as soon as you hit Bind 3. If you need to let it go to Bind 4 or 5, then you can. It's going to be hard to spam at Bind 1. So just generally speaking, hit Bind 3, play Shadow of the Moon, and start working towards your next one. So now let's come over to take a look at what happens when we include Oni and Karmic into the calculations. Now there is more going on here, but trust me, it is just as simple to understand. At the top, you can see we have a 4-hit Oni, which is going to be its second Epiphany, I believe. And we also have Karmic hitting for 150%, which I think 2 or maybe 3 of its Epiphanies are able to do. Now, there's a good chance that you might use different damage values for the Epiphanies on these cards. Trust me, it's not going to matter, and we'll talk about why in just a second. First, let's cover Executioners. To basically no one's surprise, this is still the highest damage you are going to find, no matter what you are doing. You are beating out Cursed by over 1000 damage in some situations, and Scarab is going to be around 800 damage that you're beating it by. So again, Executioners at 100% crit rate is just going to be the best thing to run. We will also look at variable crit rate for this as well, so we'll get to that in just a second. Now, comparing Scarab and Cursed, we are going to see the same situation for Moonslash. But one thing that you might immediately notice is that Cursed at 4 Moonslashes is actually going to do more damage than Scarab. And that's really, really important for one main reason. If you're not using a basic attack build, you are probably not even using 4 Moonslashes for each 1 use of Oni and 1 use of Karmic. In fact, for some builds, you will have multiple Onis or Karmics, which means you are going to greatly outscale the amount of Moonslash that you are using. So if 4 Moonslashes aren't enough to outscale 1 Oni and 1 Karmic, less slashes with more Onis and Karmics is going to be even more in Cursed Corpse's favor. In fact, when we take a look at 6 Moonslashes, you can still see that Cursed is barely being outdamaged by Scarab at this point. Even on the high end, we're looking at about 30 damage, which is nothing at all. And then once again, taking a look at the crit rate here, you can see that even as low as 25% crit rate, you are going to be getting more damage with Executioners over both Scarab and Cursed at any point. And while you can see that Scarab at 5 Moonslashes is going to do 1 more damage, and it's going to do a little bit more damage with 6 Moonslashes, we just talked about why that many Moonslashes is unlikely to be used. So again, if you're going to commit to basic attacks, commit to basic attacks. Take Scarab and take as many duplicates of Oni Hunt as you can to get as many basic attacks out as you can. Now, we didn't mess around with hit count of Shadow of the Moon too much, and the main reason for that is because it just doesn't really matter. No matter how many hits you do, Executioners is always going to be stronger, and Cursed is always going to beat out Scarab. So even if we were to go to something ridiculous like 20 hits, it's just not really changing anything. In fact, all it's going to do is make Executioners better, because even if you hold on to those to give it as many hits as possible and as much additive bonuses as possible, those additive bonuses are going to start to drown each other out. This is something we spoke about in the last video talking about partners, and for that reason, no matter what, Executioners is always going to be the best set that you can take. Now let's take a look at this weird little table here. So on the left hand side, we have the amount of Moon Slashes we are playing, we have the amount of Onis and Karmics we are playing, as well as the hit count for Shadow of the Moon, all the stuff that we were seeing before. Ignore E6 Ray and Lepidola's Whip, that's just some items that we were looking at while testing these. The top table is going to show the new set along with Executioners. Underneath it, we're going to look at Executioners mixed with Blackwing and Seth Scarab, and both of those are using Eye of the Eyeless. Next, we're going to do those same two tables, but now we're looking at Emblem, and we've also included calculations for Cursed Corpse as well. Now, the reason that the new set has a bigger table is because, of course, you need to ramp up that bonus. So the top line is when you have nothing from the bonus, the second line is when you have 1 stack, and the third line is at full stacks. Now, the reason we have Oni at 0 is because right now we are specifically looking at the basic attack version. We will change the numbers in just a second. But you can see when you are running a basic attack build, the highest damage you're going to get is all the way at the bottom. That is going to be Executioners plus Blackwing plus Seth Scarab and using Emblem. And we can see that we're doing about 130 more damage than if we were using Eye of the Eyeless. And remember, we don't even have Oni doing any damage in this calculation, we just have that 150% Karmic. And this is using Shadow of the Moon 5, but you can even see here that when we try to sabotage it and use Shadow of the Moon 1 instead, it doesn't matter, you are still going to do more damage with Emblem. And the main reason for that is because Emblem is an additive bonus versus Eye of the Eyeless, which is a multiplicative bonus. So since the base value of Moonslash is so low, all the way down at 60%, that means that Eye of the Eyeless doesn't have a big value that it can really multiply, and of course it has the same issue as Seth Scarab, where it's only applying to basic attack. Whereas Emblem is giving an additive 30, which is pretty big as far as additives go, and that is going to be applying to everything no matter what. And again, if you are able to increase your hit count for Shadow of the Moon, then you are going to be putting out much more damage with Emblem. Another thing worth looking at is if we take a look at the bottom tables, looking at Emblem here, if you look at the new set plus Executioners and compare it to Executioners plus Blackwing plus Cursed Corpse, you are missing out on nearly 1,000 damage, and this is assuming you use everything in the same turn, because if you don't, then you're going to lose the buff from the new set, and that's going to tank your damage tremendously. So even when you're using the basic attack set, which is when you can get the most attacks out in a single turn, and when you can upkeep the max benefit of the set on as many cards as possible, it's just not enough. And when you switch to a non-basic attack build, it's just going to be even harder to upkeep that buff. So if a basic attack build can't outdamage the other sets, then a non-basic attack build where you're using less cards on average is definitely not going to be better, which is why the Blackwing calculations with the new set aren't even here. It's less than Executioners, and that's all you need to know because it's less than everything. And then lastly down here, we are looking at Emblem on the 2 best sets. In this situation, we have 2 Moon Slashes for every 1 Oni, 1 Karmic, and 1 Shadow of the Moon. As we mentioned earlier, if you're not running a basic attack build, you will play more than 1 Oni and Karmic for each Moon Slash that you're using. But you can see here that even in like an ideal situation for Seth Scarab, of course, it's just going to be outclassed by Cursed Corpse. There's not enough basic attacks being used. Oni and Karmic are hitting too hard, especially with a 4-hit Oni, and that is going to result in nearly 100 damage loss for Seth Scarab. And again, the more Oni and Karmic you use and the less Moon Slashes you use, this difference is just going to get even bigger in Cursed Corpse's favor. So, as we mentioned at the start of the video, the best way that you're going to be able to gear your CHIZURU is using Executioner's Tool, Blackwing, and either Cursed Corpse or Seth Scarab, depending on if you're going for a non-basic attack build or a basic attack build. And you don't actually want to build Eye of the Eyeless on her because that is going to give you less damage than Emblem, even on a basic attack build, so you want to be picking up Emblem. Now, one final note before we finish off, I did mention that on the left-hand side, it says L-Whip, which is Lepidola's Whip. Some people are probably going to point out, but Shizu, you can't get Lepidola's Whip and Eye of the Eyeless or Emblem because they're not on the same planet. I am fully aware of that. It is just there as a gear piece that is giving us more damage, because realistically, you aren't going to have just one piece. Same as here, we looked at multiple sets, because just looking at the first table, you're not going to run just one 2-piece set and not run your other 4 relic slots. You're not going to run 6 Cursed Corpse, for example. So that's why we also didn't talk too much about Lepidola's Whip. If I'm not mistaken, Lepidola's Whip only comes from Twin Shadow, and you are most likely not going to be farming your CHIZURU on Twin Shadow anytime soon. So for those who are curious, I will put Lepidola's Whip and Violet's Butterfly Whip on the screen right now so you can see what they do. They are actually like genuinely good relics to be running. It's just unrealistic that you're going to get the opportunity to build them on CHIZURU. But with all that being said, I hope you guys found this information helpful. I tried to put more colors and stuff in this one just to try and make things a little bit easier to read. Obviously, the presentation has changed up a little bit. So let me know what you guys think about it, whether you want me to keep doing the stuff with colors, if you want to keep having this kind of presentation, and of course, if there's any other calculations that you are interested in. I will try to start making these quicker, but these just generally take a long time to make. There's a lot of things to calculate, there's a lot of things to consider. I also have a bad habit of triple and quadruple checking numbers that I know for a fact are correct, and then when something's not correct, it just takes forever to get through these. So I apologize that sometimes it takes long for these to come out, but I do want to make sure that these are as accurate as possible and that the information is as usable as possible, which is why sometimes we do need to look at combinations of sets and combinations of items and stuff like that, variable crit rate, whatever. So once again, I'm sorry these take a long time to come out. I will try to get more out sooner. Hopefully, I will have a full CHIZURU guide coming out very soon. I want to try and get some better decks for her before I make that, so we'll see. And then I'm also planning some fun stuff that I will talk about a little bit more in a future video. But for now, let me know what you think. Hopefully this information was helpful, and I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe.